Do you know who your people are? I grew up in the South, and that's one of the first questions that I have been asked in almost every social situation in my entire life. Who was your mama before? Whatever the case may be. And I want to say to you that psychologists say this is very important. Our children need to know certain stories about their life so they can be resilient. They need to know the story of their birth. They need to know how their mama and their daddy got together, even if they're not still together. They need to know how they got together. And it helps if they know the stories of their grandparents. It was 50 plus years ago. I was 10 years old, and I got off the school bus, and I heard, "Your granddaddy died." The upstairs neighbor's teenage son was out on the porch, and he had heard, and he just could not keep himself from sharing the information. And I have to say to you, I was speechless. Now, y'all don't know me, but this is a rare occasion, okay? And I stood there for a moment, and I just did not know what to say. I went on in the house, and I knew I was supposed to be sad. I mean, it was my mama's daddy, and she was sad, but I didn't really know my papa. We had lived with them from when I was born. They took me home to the hospital, to their house on Main Street. We lived there till I was almost 4, and then we'd only moved 10 blocks up the street onto Floyd Avenue. And we went there, of course, at least for one Sunday dinner every month. My grandmama's chicken was something you'd have crawled over grass for. Forgive me, grass too. But to say my papa was a quiet man would be a gross understatement. I mean, this man would come into the house, sit down at the table, and all you saw was the top of his head until he was finished eating. And I can remember so very little that he ever said to me. Boy. Now, boy could be everything from a summons to a warning to an exclamation, but Papa was just quiet. His little tiny man, he had coal black hair. Even when he passed away, he still had coal black hair. He had big old ears, looked like a taxi cab coming around the corner with the doors open, and a wizened face. But I just didn't know anything, and so I'm 10 years old, and I decided I needed to know more about my papa, so I started asking questions. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I hear all the time that kids don't listen. I wasn't that child, because they'd say something and then I'd go, then what happened? Well, tell me more. I always liked the old people because they had stories. And I learned, for example, that my papa was older than my grandmama. He had met her when he was driving the mail in an open cab Model T truck over the Appalachians. I think that explained the creases in his face. Can you imagine wintertime in the Appalachians in an open cab truck? I'd seen a picture of him in his uniform, and he had been a bus driver at one time. I discovered that he had been a sheriff's deputy in Farmville during the 30s when Dillinger came through, and my daddy asked him what he did, and he said, I hid in an alley behind a barrel and watched him drive through. What would you have done? When he passed away, he was working as a mechanic, and he apparently was a very popular man because the fellows at work had asked him to go out some nights afterwards, and he had an appreciation for John Barleycorn, and my papa, well, it turned out he was colorblind. He was always fussing for when that blue light was going to change, and he did not make left turns. And they lived on Main Street, which is a one-way street, and so he would have to go by, and on nights when he was okay, he would just park out front. But on the nights when he'd been out with the boys, he would have to turn right, and then turn into the alley behind the house and just drive into the backyard. This was in the days when people still would sometimes drive with an open container, so it was a different time. But the most interesting thing that I discovered, and I have to tell you why this is so important to me, because I'm fascinated by how people put food on the table. I'm fascinated by how people make a living. I like reading census tracts just to see what the jobs are. It's fascinating to me because I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and so the idea that how do the people before me make a living just excites me. It turned out he had a general store at one time, and the best I can figure, it must have been in a little town called Prospect. Now, Prospect's just a little wide space in the road down just a hop, skip, and a jump from Farmville. Anybody here know where Longwood is? It's down, southern part of the state. And there used to be a railroad track that went through there, but that doesn't even exist anymore. There just wasn't enough traffic. But that's where my mama was born. And so I got this picture in my head about what this little general store must have been like.
You always see in the movies where there's a pot-bellied stove in the general store, but no, my pawpaw's general store had a fireplace. And in the wintertime, they would roast chestnuts on open fire. You know, like in the song, chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I mean, it was very idyllic. And he had a cat. Cat had a sort of free roam of the place, but they said the poor thing was just kind of, well, it was antsy. It didn't sleep well. It was kind of mangy looking. He had a monkey. Now, before you go, oh, come on, you're pushing this too far. I grew up on Floyd Avenue in the 3500 block in Richmond, which was just 1 block away from Standard Drugstore, and there was a monkey in a cage right at the back door, so why wouldn't my pawpaw have had a monkey? It had a little stick it played with. Well, it turns out the monkey was a delight to everybody except the cat. Because you see, he would wait till the cat had fallen asleep. He would go over, he'd grab it by the neck, and he'd drag it over to the fireplace, and he would use its paw to rake the chestnuts out of the fire, okay? So I think it explains why the cat didn't really sleep very well. But it was springtime, and I say this because they said the door was open, just the screen door, and a fella pulled up in a pickup truck, and he comes on inside, and this was a place where men sort of congregated, and the next thing you know, there's a fuss out on the porch. Apparently the guy had a dog in the front of the pickup truck, and it's now trying to get inside. It's jumping up and down and making a ruckus, and I don't know if it bumped up against the screen door, got it to bounce a little bit, got its nose in and came inside, which is how my dogs always came in the house, unless you had latched it, right? Or if some damn fool let the dog in. But the next thing you know, this dog's inside, and he's trying to get up on the counter to get to the monkey. And the fella says, if you don't put that monkey away, that dog's going to get a hold of it and kill it. And my papa says, ain't nobody going to kill the monkey. You want to buy something? The next thing you know, there's a blood-curdling scream. And if you were like me the first time I heard this story, I thought, oh no, the dog got a hold of the monkey. No. That monkey has jumped down off that counter and gotten on the back of that dog, and he's grabbed him by the back of the neck the way he grabs that cat to drag him over to the fireplace, and that dog is terrified. And that dog is turning in circles, and it's snapping and barking at everything, and the men are fussing and cussing and jumping out of the way and knocking things out of the way, and the next thing you know, they go through the door. I don't mean out the door. I mean they went through the door, and now the men are out on the porch, and they're watching, and that dog is running down the road, and that monkey's on his back, and he's whipping him with that stick, and it's like the Kentucky Derby, and then they're going, and they were gone. It's quiet. They all went all back inside, and that's when the cussing and the fussing started all over again as they're picking up all that, that mess that had been made when the dog was in there. And it's later on that afternoon, and one of the fellas yells, "Hey, Oliver, come out here." Oliver was my pawpaw. And he goes out on the porch, and lo and behold, here comes the monkey. He's coming home. He's got his stick. He's had an adventure. I mean, everything's wonderful. Well, it's later in the summer, and this fellow in the pickup truck comes back up again. And he comes inside, and he hauls up, and he tries to hit the monkey, and I don't know whether he hit the monkey and the monkey got out of the way or whatever, but my papa's like, "What's the matter with you?" And the guy says, "I ought to kill that monkey." And Papa said, "Ain't nobody go kill no monkey. You won't buy some or not?" At which point, the guy begins to explain what had happened. He said, "Look, I don't know what that monkey did to that dog of mine, but that had been my best fighting dog. And you hear that dog won't hunt, that dog won't fight, that dog won't even get in the pickup truck anymore. That dog showed up 2 weeks after he left. He crawled on the porch, and he's worthless." Well, I want to let you know, I've grown up hearing that story since I was, what's the old expression, knee-high to a grasshopper, right? And so I always thought it was cool, My pawpaw had a variety of jobs. He was entrepreneurial. He had a monkey. I mean, this is just way too cool. And my children, you'd go on a trip. They'd say, "Tell us about Pawpaw's monkey." Their friends would come along. "You got to tell them about Pawpaw's monkey." Well, a few years ago, my baby brings me a gift for Father's Day. It's a wood print. It's a picture of a monkey with a cat using its paw to rake the chestnuts out of the fire. And my daughter's going, "Look, Daddy, it's your pawpaw's monkey." I love detective stories. I read them all the time, and one of the lines that's common in all of these is there ain't no such thing as a coincidence. I just don't like coincidences. And a buddy of mine's a folklorist, a librarian at UVA, and so I called George and I said, George, you ever heard of this? He said, I'll get back to you. It turns out this story is a 15th century French folk tale. So much of my identity is wrapped up in entrepreneurial ancestors and whatnot, right? And I got to tell you now, I don't know if any of this is true. But I want to say to you, if it turns out that my papa did have a general store and he had a monkey, that's cool. My papa had a monkey, right? What's not to like about that? But it's entirely possible my papa might have been a storyteller. And if that's the case, that means that my grandson is, let me think, the great-great-great-grandson of a storyteller. And frankly, that's a story I could live with. Thank you.